I've already covered this in a much longer video earlier in 2023, shortly after the NTSB hearings. But let me post a short video because some people are confused about what information was withheld from Unified Command, what Norfolk Southern failed to tell them. And you'll notice that at least on 3 occasions, Oxyvinyls told Norfolk Southern that they believed that the tankers were not polymerizing. The only reason the one went up to that little spike in heat was because there was a flare up of a fire right next to it on Saturday night. And then it quickly cooled down. And you'll see that by the time they blew the tankers, the temperature had already lowered to, I believe it was 127 degrees. And they said that there was no chance of polymerization. None of the shrapnel or none of the evidence of the tankers ever showed any type of PVC forming or any polymerization. Also notice that there are some very, very obvious answers to certain questions here. And you can tell that the people answer them very confidently until the very obvious ones come, in which you either might implicate yourself or implicate others that may be eventually helping you in some way. Then those answers get very long, and the answers are very evasive, and they don't really answer the question, when a simple yes would suffice as the other questions were answered. So enjoy, and tell me what you think.
The conversations certainly were around polymerization, the concern on Saturday with rail car of concern at that time. So it's talking about the details without specifically referencing the document, if you will.
Was there anything in the safety data sheet that conflicted with the advice that you were providing to the folks on scene?
Not from my perspective.
All right. Well, please tell us some more about your communications with Norfolk Southern and its contractors. Who was your main point of contact there, and what sort of technical assistance did you provide to them?
So Saturday and Sunday, we had conference calls. And so there was a special situations team, as I mentioned, that we formed in Dallas. And we had several folks calling in that weren't in the room, in the special situations room. But we had phone calls on Saturday, and we had a conference call Sunday morning. And then Mr. Smith arrived Sunday afternoon with a couple other folks to really just be a resource on the ground to help support them in whatever way that he could.
And so what did you or your Oxyvinyls team understand, given the information provided by the organizations on scene? What did you understand about what was happening with the tank cars?
Yeah, so through at least the 2 calls, what we understood is what was well described by Mr. McCarty earlier. There was a lot of concern about one of the rail cars in the pool fire that had gone off. I believe my recall was 30 seconds every 2 minutes for 8 or 10 hours through the evening. So it had really been working in that pool fire. And then all of the relief devices went off, and it went off again for 60 or 70 minutes. And I think he had mentioned they were getting materials together to do a hot tap. And then that one went off, and it gave them pause. So our initial guidance was, we didn't think that was polymerization, but, here's how you know. If you can go take a temperature on a rail car, you'll know for sure. And when you're putting people's lives at risk around the rail cars, you need to know for sure. Certainly, we're all on the same mission on that front.
So, yeah, was there a consensus amongst your team at Oxyvinyls in Dallas as to, what was going to, as far as the chemical behavior of the vinyl chloride monomer, were there any differing opinions on what was going to happen?
Not on the phone calls we had. I mean, we were trying to communicate. We didn't believe polymerization was going on. But more importantly, I think what we told them is how they could know for sure. Right? Don't take my opinion for it. When it's your safety at risk, you go prove to yourself if it's safe to get a temperature, as they well described. You would know for sure, because these reactions are extremely exothermic. And if you're talking about rupturing a rail car, you're talking about being at 320 degrees. And you can take that temperature anywhere on the rail car skin and know you got a problem. So it's a long way to go, and it will be very obvious if you have that reaction going on.
So the temperature trend that we had on the screen earlier, what does that tell you about what would about polymerization.
Yeah, so my understanding is that for that rail car on the west end, one, our view when it was described, that rail car was leaning against a PVC car that had heat, smoldering fires going on. And I think I read in Chief Drabick's notes that, maybe around midnight when they had that fire erupt near it, the temperature had dropped, the fire erupted kind of near it, it heated up to 139, they put the fire out, and it immediately dropped to, back to 129. So that trend of 12 degrees, over 22 hours of monitoring, that also corresponds with a 20 PSI drop in pressure in the car. It's conclusive to all of us that polymerization was not going on in that car. And the location where they were taking the temperature on the skin is valid enough to draw that conclusion.
During the night while I was present, the temperatures were being relayed hourly to the command post, and I was sharing those with the incident commander and unified command. That was done throughout the night.
You said the one car in question, and I believe you were referring to OCPX 80370, or what you had described as the West car. Saturday night to Sunday morning, its shell temperature was about 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And then within an hour, it increased to 138 Fahrenheit. Then you told Chief Drabick you believe these cars were polymerizing inside, and that eventually, if you did nothing, the cars would come apart in a violent explosion. Is that your recollection?
When the situation with the temperatures and the concerns of the car were brought to me, I did have a conversation with Chief Drabick about what we believed was going on with those cars. Did explain we only had this much data on one car, but we felt sure if the problem was going on in that one car, the other cars had been exposed to the same conditions. We felt the same thing was going on with them.
3 different occasions we expressed we didn't believe it was, but I think more importantly, we said, here's how you can know so that you can protect your folks. If you can get a temperature, it will tell you whether polymerization is occurring or not.
Did you explain that the reaction was highly exothermic, that it had a distinct temperature signature?
Yes, we did talk about that.
And now that the exhibit's up, does the temperature trend on exhibit D8 show an exothermic reaction?
No.
Does it show polymerization?
No.
Thank you for those responses, Mr. Thomas. My next question is for you, Mr. Wood. We have heard that one of the justifications for the vent and burn was an extreme temperature change. What was the amount of this extreme temperature change?
I don't believe we ever expressed an extreme temperature change. We said we were alarmed by a rise in temperature, and these cars had been exposed to extreme temperatures for multiple days. I don't know of any reference to an extreme temperature change.
Thank you for that clarification. Could you quantify what the temperature increase was to justify the vent and burn?
Again, the temperature rise in question was a 3 to 4 degree temperature rise over about an hour, with the cars not involved, hadn't been in a pool fire for several hours.
And my last question for you, Mr. Wood, is were you shown the data trend reflected on this exhibit D8 before the vent and burn was conducted?
Yes, I was the person logging this data.
Chief Drabick, I read in your testimony, I did read your statement about the 13 minutes and it being related to wanting to conduct the vent and burn in daylight. At what point did you become aware that oxyvinyls existed?
The only knowledge I have of oxyvinyl and any interaction with them whatsoever was early on when we were still at the Main Street command post. Somebody from there came in, announced themselves as members of oxyvinyl looking for Norfolk Southern.
That's it.
That is the only interaction, conversation, anything that I had to do with oxyvinyl, whether it be them or through anybody else.
Thank you. Did Norfolk Southern inform you at any point that they had spoken to OxyVinyl's and that OxyVinyl's did not believe polymerization was occurring?
No, ma'am.
Do you believe you should have been provided that information, certainly with 13 minutes to make a decision?
I believe any information you have is power. And the more information you have, the better you are prepared to make decisions. I think that the polymerization, as it's been said many times, is just one aspect into this whole process that we had to go through. Again, I revert back to, we took all the information we had from the subject matter experts, and not just me, the entire Unified Command staff. We took all of that information and listened to the options we had.
There's decision-making and then there's informed decision-making.
Correct. Having that information would have been good to have. It's another piece of information. I can't say whether it would have changed the outcome on the vent and burn at all. But yeah, that information would have been good to have.
Mr. Padfield, do you think Governor Shapiro deserved to have that information?
Ma'am, I do believe that that information would have been nice to have to be able to help inform the decision.
And Major General Harris, do you think Governor DeWine should have had that information to consider?
Madam Chair, it would have been helpful.
All right. Thank you very much. With my time, well, let me ask, Mr. Wood, if you could go back knowing what you do now, would you provide that information so that you could provide a complete picture for everyone to consider?
Like I've said before, you learn something from every incident. We absolutely, when we take a hot wash at this, we'll take a look at everything, and anything that we feel like we can correct or improve on, especially from a safety standpoint and for first responders and to speed an incident along, we'll always take that into account.
Thank you. But do you believe that the chief should have had information on any concerns from OxyVinyl's as incident commander?
What I could say is if the man says that was information that he would like to have, we probably should do a better job of getting that information to it.
And for the governors as well?
When we're dealing with a real-time emergency basis, we're funneling information up through Unified Command. How information disperses out of Unified Command is not a sole Norfolk Southern process. That's a Unified Command process.
Right, but Norfolk Southern had the conversations with OxyVinyl, and if nobody knows the conversations were had, that information needs to be provided.
I understand what you're saying, but that's not the question I was asked.
I asked if you thought, that Governor Shapiro and Governor DeWine should have had that information, and if you should have provided that information.
Yes, so I guess what my answer is if Chief Drabeck says that that's information that he desperately would have had, should have had, we're going to have to do a better job providing that to Unified Command. But ultimately, it going to any governor or party that's not there, that's a Unified Command decision how that information is treated.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.